Okay, alright. So I'm Unseen Warfare. I'm here to talk about Not of This World, and we'll see how this goes. It's a book that was released, sort of a biography of Saint Seraphim Rose, and there's I think another edition of the book, a later edition of it. What is that book called? Life and Works. But I think I like this copy a little better than that translation of it, or edit of it, rather. Um, so we're going to start reading from that. Um, so here's the preface. It says, Father Seraphim Rose is a man known and loved today all over Russia. Anyone in Russia who knows anything about his ancestral faith, Orthodox Christianity, knows Father Seraphim's name. His books, the people there say, changes lives. An American Orthodox convert who recently spent several months in Russia has written, quote, when I would meet Russians, invariably, after finding out I'm an American, they would excitingly ask, did you know Father Seraphim Rose? It is a startling fact that almost everyone knows of him, even the children. They consider Father Seraphim, his writings, and the witness of his life in Christ to be pivotal to the resurrection of Holy Russia in our days. During the era when their religion was being mocked and undermined to an atheist state, Father Seraphim spoke openly to people in Russia against the spirit of international godlessness, making them ashamed of their ancient faith, giving them strength and courage to continue struggling. He spoke to their hearts and souls in a way that made sense out of their long decades of persecution, suffering, and purification. Recently, a monk living in an ancient Russian monastery of Elam had said, quote, without Father Seraphim Rose, we'd all be dead. Well over 10 years ago, Father Seraphim's work reached Russia from America, were translated and were clandestinely distributed in typewritten manuscripts from one end of Russia to the other. Today, with the advent of more freedom, they're being published there openly in mass quantities in books and magazines, and are being talked about on television and radio. His books are available everywhere, even on book tables in the metro, subway, and kiosks on the street. It would probably be no exaggeration to say that he is Russia's most popular contemporary Orthodox writer. Portraits of him are being painted, and in the newly reopened Optina monastery, in the very room where the holy elder Ambrose received such visitors as Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, and Gogol, a photograph of him now stands. In other Orthodox countries, especially those formerly dominated by communism, Father Seraphim is also widely loved, his works published and studied, and his name held in great reverence. Recently, a monastic from Serbia has written, quote, the Athonite Hesychist and instructor of prayer of the heart, Bishop Amphilosius, once said that Father Seraphim was granted the greatest gift that a man could be granted on earth, the gift of spiritual discernment. Who was this man, and who, although known only to a small segment of people in the affluent pluralistic West, has made such a tremendous impression on the suffering Orthodox lands? Who was this penetrating spiritual philosopher who appears to have emerged out of some ancient Patericon? Who was this, quote, desert dwelling monk whose name in Russia is now surrounded with legends about his remote life in the wilderness? The answer is that this man, who came to be called Father Seraphim Rose, was basically a simple, wholesome, and above all honest American. He was raised in sunny Southern California, a few hundred miles from Hollywood and Disneyland, by parents who had never heard of Eastern Orthodoxy. His mother only wanted him to be successful. His father only wanted him to be happy. The story of Father Seraphim Rose is not just the story of one individual, it's a story of what can occur in the conscience of the American soul when God stirs the strings of the American sense of righteousness. Father Seraphim's basic honesty enabled him to pierce the darkness of his times, not only for his fellow Americans, but also for those far off, enslaved lands as well. At an early age, he rebelled against the superficiality of modern American society, against its worldliness, materialism, light-mindedness, and boring rationalism. As part of his rebellion, he partook the restlessness, despair, nihilism, and lawlessness of the quote, angry young men of his generation, the progressive intellectuals, bohemians, and beatniks, his forthright, self sacrificing, quote, American cowboy character. However, pulled him back from the self indulgent escapes which his peers were making. Even when the quote escape into the exotic realm of Buddhist enlightenment left his soul empty and yearning. It was then that God revealed himself to Father Seraphim's sorrowing soul, and the conversion from modern American rebellion to ancient apostolic orthodoxy was begun. When he did come to orthodoxy, he cut right through all the externals, all the worldliness and boring organizational mentality that was in the church as well, to go right to the essence and heart of the otherworldly Christianity. He had blazed the path for other honest, forthright American souls to follow as they heed their own, quote, American sense of righteousness. But there was another aspect of Father Seraphim, one that especially endeared him in the hearts of the Orthodox Christians behind the Iron Curtain. As his monastic partner of many years had observed, quote, Father Seraphim was a man who knew how to suffer. He knew the value of redemptive suffering, saw it manifested in the Christian martyrs and confessors of his own time, and consciously embraced it, not only outwardly through hardships of his wilderness monastic life, but also inwardly, in the quote, pain of the heart that characterizes true Christian love. Before he had found the truth, he had suffered for the lack of it, and now having found it, he suffered for the sake of it. The author of these lines was a spiritual son of Father Seraphim, having been returned to the love of Jesus Christ through him. I, too, had wanted something deeper that was offered by the superficial society and superficial Christianity around me. I, too, was influenced by the youthful rebellion of my times and delved into the alternative path of Buddhism. Had Father Seraphim not shown me the only true way out, cutting away all the obstacles of our Western consciousness with the flaming sword of his suffering for truth, I might, like so many of my peers, still be living in an aimless life of quote, quiet desperation. Perhaps I would have just followed the spirit of the age and settled for the synthetic belief system that I could, quote, feel comfortable with. As I stood beside Father Seraphim's coffin in his simple monastery church, beholding the radiant, heavenly image of his face in repose, I shed tears of gratitude, thanking him, quote, for giving me the truth. The pearl is the great price for which it is worth selling everything that is in this world. As I write these lines a decade later, on the eve of the 10th anniversary of his repose, I see the tremendous potential of what he accomplished in all too brief life at 48 years. Mine is only one of millions of lives that he has deeply touched. I feel compelled to make his message known and give back to others what he has given me. For just as Russia once brought the fullness of truth, orthodoxy to America, so now America, through Father Seraphim, bringing that truth back whence it came. Through this man who was a pivot of the American conscience, modern America brings forth out of its own soil a fruit of ancient mystical Christianity. It is a depth of Christianity that America as yet scarcely knows, formed in the silent heart of the catacombs, hidden from all earthly tumult and vanity, and by nature not of this world. Okay, so hope everybody's doing all right. What's up, Orthodox Cheetos? All right, man. So we're gonna continue on reading. So it says, um, author's note: as a warrior of the mind and heart, Father Seraphim Rose is often called to stand in the defense of truth when he saw it being attacked. The snares and pitfalls which he warred against still remain, waiting to trip up people and throw them off the way. We hope that this book will in some way help to save them from these perils. Father Seraphim's battles were not so much with individuals as with false concepts of Christianity, theology, and church life. Therefore, to mitigate the personal aspects of the battles, we have hidden the identities of the persons directly involved in them. With the exceptions of those who have since reposed, we have done the same with others whom we feel would rather not have their names mentioned. Part 1. Beginnings. This man is not a well-born member of a famous house. He's one of many, yet he's a true nobleman. Euripides. Okay, so Father Seraphim Rose had been called for the first American-born link to the mind of the ancient Holy Fathers. Was born in a typical white Protestant middle-class family in typical California beach town, San Diego. The name given him at birth was Eugene, which means well-born or noble. Eugene's parents were second-generation immigrants to the United States. Both his mother and parents came from Norway. John Christian Holbeck, his grandfather, arrived with his family when he was 13. Hilma Helikson, his grandmother, though born in Norway, was actually Swedish. She was brought to America at age 3. The Holbecks and the Heliksons settled in the small town of Two Harbors, Minnesota, where John and Hilma grew up, met, and were married in 1896. John worked as a driller in a diamond mine and then tried his hand at farming. He and Hilma had 5 children. Their third child, Esther, was born in 1901, was Eugene's mother. Esther was raised on a 40-acre farm that her father had bought at $10 an acre. It was poor land, quote, stump land, she used to call it, and she remembered her father using dynamite to get rid of the stumps. John had to augment the income of his growing family by working a night shift in town. Later he had cows and peddled milk from house to house. The Holbecks had their children baptized and raised them in the Lutheran Church. Great families' emphasis was placed on education. They sent the oldest son, Jack, to college as a great financial sacrifice, and he repaid them after he became established financially. Although only 2 of the Holbecks' children were able to attend college, nearly all their grandchildren and great-grandchildren earned at least one college degree. As a matter of pride, everyone was expected to be successful. John Holbeck was among those strugglers who gave their life's blood to the building of America. His daunting task of hewing out living from the land left no home for pastimes. Once, when his daughter Esther returned from a walk in the woods, singing and carrying flowers, he immediately looked on this in terms and its practical value. Quote, "You can't eat music or flowers," he told her in his heavy Norwegian brogue, I guess. Brogue? Yeah. Brogue. Okay. Later in life, Esther did take time out to pursue music and to paint, mostly flowers, but the experience of growing up in such a hard-working family gave her a no-nonsense practicality that never left her. She was always concerned with the financial side of things. The man she married, Frank Rose, was a rather different stamp, a humble, quiet, agreeable sort of fellow. He was one to take just what comes to life. Frank was of French and Dutch stock. On his father's side, he had a French ancestor who had been a soldier in Napoleon's army, and married a Hungarian gypsy. If there was any passionate gypsy blood in the Rose lineage, however, it certainly skipped a generation in the person of Frank. Frank's father, Louis Deseret L.D. Rose, had immigrated from France to Canada and then to the United States and had opened an ice cream parlor and candy store in Two Harbors. He had a wooden leg, and as the result of a train accident as a young man. Quote, "No one pitied him for this or talked about it," recalls one family member. Quote, "It was just something that happened, and life went on." Although from a Roman Catholic background, Lewis was confirmed atheist with sympathies towards socialism. He claimed to have read the New Testament before the age of 12, the impressiveness of this claim being evidently intended to lend weight to his atheism. Lewis' views on religion, however, did not prevent him from marrying a devout Dutch Roman Catholic, May Vanderboom, whose family had settled in Marquette, Michigan. Marquette. Marquette, Michigan. Louis and May had 4 sons, one of whom drowned at the age of 12. Frank, their second son, was born in 1890, according to his mother's wishes. He served as a Catholic altar boy for several years. May died at the age of 48, when Frank was only 14, but he continued serving in the church for 4 more years. Frank Rose fought for his country in the army during World War I, going to France and returning home as a sergeant. He met Esther Holbeck when she was working at his father's shop, quote, Rose's Candy Store. She was 11 years younger than he, and he had graduated from high school. In 1921, they were married in Two Harbors. Frank tried his hand at the candy and ice cream business, even opening his own store after his father's had closed down. Later, he worked for General Motors, during which time his first child, Elaine, was born. In 1924, when Elaine was 2 years old, Frank and Esther moved to Southern California, sunshine, away from the bitter Minnesota winters. In San Diego, they opened another candy store, a franchise, quote, Caramel Corn Shop, which took good business only when the Navy fleet came into town. They eventually had to close it, and Frank got a steady job as the janitor for the San Diego Park and uh, Recreation Department. His work consisted mostly of taking care of the sports stadium. 2 more children were born to the Rose family in San Diego: Franklin Jr., who was born 4 years after Elaine, and Eugene, who was born another 8 years later. As all three of the Rose's children were intelligent, good-looking, and above average in height. Eugene Dennis Rose was born on August 13th, 1934. This was during the depth of the Depression. The Roses had bought stocks and lost them, and at times they had scarcely enough to eat. Although Eugene was probably too young to remember this period, Elaine recalls the family standing in bread lines. Quote, when there is hardship because of lack of money, she says, quote, there is something that is not easily forgotten. Success becomes equated with monetary reward. Esther, already inoculated with the values of hard work and thrift, now became frugal in the extreme. She remained this way throughout her life, even after Elaine and Franklin Jr. were on their own and family was comfortable financially. She never gave up her practice, learned during the Depression, of saving slivers of soap from household sinks and then boiling them down to make new soap cakes. All her children were raised with no frills attitude towards life. Frank Rose was already in his mid 40s when Eugene was born. Because he was so much younger than his brother and sister, Eugene was raised essentially as an only child because he was born and his parents called him their, quote, extra, uh, extra dividend. Okay. Extra dividend. I don't know what that means. Okay. Like he's, alright. When Eugene was only 4 years old, his sister Elaine, then 16, graduated from high school and left to go to business college in Los Angeles. 2 years later, she married, and in subsequent years, her younger brother, only infrequently before he left home, she would take care of Eugene at home with her parents or working in the caramel corn shop. Quote, I remember him as happy, lovable child, she says. Okay. Okay, what's up, man? All right. Uh, okay, so it says Eugene's surviving grandparents moved to San Diego after his parents did. Louis Rose died when Eugene was only 7 years old, but John and Hilma Holbeck lived until he was a full grown. And lived until he was full grown. In later years, he was given a family heirloom, a grandfather clock which he had been given to Louis and May Rose as a wedding present. Uh, okay, to the end of his life. Eugene treasured this clock as a link to family tradition and continued the custom of winding it every night, long after it ceased to tell the correct time. Esther, having a decisive, strong willed personality, was unchallenged ruler of the Rose household. She had to be on top of all that was happening. Nothing was hidden from her, for she felt it was her personal right to walk into her children's room at any time, dig through their drawers, and read their letters and papers. She was a very demanding of her children, but seldom, if ever, accorded praise. She was from a generation of parents who felt that it was not good to compliment children too much, lest they become conceited. But although she did not praise them to their faces, she would rave about them to her friends and relatives when they weren't around. Above all, she would brag about Eugene. Quote, "We were not a demonstrative family," Elaine recalls. Even Frank, although he was a very warm and loving man, was embarrassed to display affection. Elaine said that he never kissed her while she was growing up. Quote, "Mother was tough when crossed," Elaine says, and quote, "and father kept out of harm's way. It seems they had little choice but to be dominated. He was scrupulously avoided conflicts and always expressed assent by smiling and saying, quote, betcha. He seldom, if ever, harbored bitterness or ill will towards anyone. Like his father, Eugene responded to his mother's will without complaint. He was remembered in the family as the, quote, perfect son, the proverbial dutiful child. Quote, if there was a favorite child, Elaine recalls, quote, it was Eugene, because he always tried hard to do what was expected and did not cross mother. Quote, Eugene was a joy, Esther says. Quote, his father thought the sun rose on him. According to his wife, Frank was, quote, satisfied with a little bit. His interest was to be at home with me. He was happy just to be home and take care of the yard. He was a contented man, having no need of outside interest. He always took a lesser job, never told Eugene what to be in life or pushed him to make money. Quote, Frank was not a practical man, Esther affirms. Quote, he was the intelligentsia, and I was the practical one. Compared with Esther, Frank was an avid reader, going through two newspapers a day. Um, okay. And faithfully keeping up with the magazines, U.S. News and World Report, Business Week, and the Wall Street Journal. He did not, however, read many books. More could be said of Frank's virtues than of his intellectual achievements. Like all boys, Eugene looked up to his father. Like many, he took from him his best qualities. Growing up, Eugene emulated his father's uh, practice of never exalting himself. He too, at least when it came to worldly honor and material things, was, quote, satisfied with a little bit. From his mother, Eugene acquired a down to earth practicality, a touch of stubbornness, and a clear, concise, living language, what often made up of folksy words and phrases, and yet was spoken with perfect articulation. And from both parents, he acquired good old American honesty and straightforwardness, which later enabled him to see through various forms of hypocrisy. Frank Rose was a typical American male, though perhaps was with an extra dose of docility. He displayed that shy, dogged integrity, that deeply loving nature which is embarrassed to express itself, characteristic of the common man, so the populist books and movies of the period claimed, could become a hero if placed in the right circumstances. Eugene inherited these qualities, an inborn disposition together with his childhood environment that dictated that he should grow up according to the American Gary Cooper image. In the midst of all this standard Americana, there was ushered in another element that was decidedly not standard. It was as if into an average American family a true nobleman had been born. In some ways, Eugene was absolutely different from the rest of his family. Although during his boyhood and before his personality was fully developed, this difference was not nearly as apparent as it was later on. At first, it could be seen only in the fact that he was remarkably thoughtful and a quiet child with a natural restraint and behavior unusual in the boys of his age. Well, Eugene was serious, studious boy from early childhood. His mother had said he was extraordinarily intelligent. His natural genius was first noticed in his ability to grasp things right away. But before children his own age, and sometimes before adults, one of his elementary school teachers once said of him, quote, I feel hurried when he walks into the room. I feel that I have to get right down to business so as not to waste his time. Eugene's reserved and studious nature, however, did not hinder this participation in some of the unusual pastimes and activities of American boys. As a little boy, he played cowboys on a wooden horse and later joined the Cub Scouts and kept a chart of basketball scores. And when he was 6 years old, he began to take piano lessons, which he continued in college. Between the ages of 10 and 12, he was a traffic patrol officer at his elementary school, a duty at which his mother remembers taking very seriously. Upon graduating from the school, he was given an honorary discharge with the rank of sergeant, just as his father had from the army. Eugene had a great love for nature. During all 3 summers of his junior high school years, he attended courses in zoology and the Junior Summer School of Science sponsored by the San Diego Society of Natural History. As part of the courses, he was able to study animals firsthand at the famous San Diego Zoo, living near the ocean. He had a special interest in marine life and kept preserved octopi and other sea creatures in his closet. He also had a small butterfly collection. A fascination with the night sky inspired him to paint his bedroom ceiling with stars, all their proper places. On Friday evening, he and his father would walk together in the neighborhood library. This was a weekly ritual. Their night out. Eugene would come home loaded with books. During summer, he took part in the library, quote, vacation reading club. Eugene began reading the works of Charles Dickens at a young age. His mother remembers laughing aloud while reading the Pickwick Papers to himself. When it came time for him to go to sleep, he would barge into his room and turn out the light. Later, she would be awakened by the sound of giggling. Returning to her son's room to see what was going on, she would discover him under the blanket with a flashlight, continuing to read the Pickwick Papers, which had once brought Dickens' overnight fame, was too captivating for the young Eugene to put down. Okay, so it says, all right. What's up, boy? New here. Glad to have you. And we'll continue on. So if you just got here, I'm reading from Not of This World. It's a biography of Father Seraphim Rose's life. So I'm going to continue. So it says Eugene had a little dog named Ditto. Ditto was not too smart, but was Eugene's own creature, and he had exceptional love for it. He would look into its eyes as it were human. When Ditto was run over by a car, Eugene cried inconsolably. This was his first encounter with death. Others thought of the reaction was exaggerated. Someone said, quote, it is unnatural to love a dog like that. A dog. Together with his abnormally loving nature, the young Eugene had strong religious inclinations. His mother, a church-going Protestant Christian, was the one to encourage this interest. His father had dropped out of the Catholic Church at age 18. No one talked about this, and no one knew why. Although Frank Rose was not like his father in being anti-religious, Frank was not anti-anything, for that matter. He never showed any incentive towards going to church. In later years, he attended a Protestant church, but according to Esther, this was only to please her. Quote, as children, Elaine remembers, quote, we went with the mother to various Lutheran, Baptist, Methodist, and Presbyterian churches, where mother always sang in the choir. We usually changed churches because she had some disagreement with the minister. As a young boy, Eugene went to Bible class at a Presbyterian church near his house. He would often surprise his parents with his knowledge of the scriptures. He would quote to them from memory. According to his mother, the Old Testament books of Esther and Samuel left a deep impression on him. When he was in the 8th grade, he went entirely on his own initiative to be baptized and confirmed as a Christian in a Methodist church. In high school, Eugene ceased to pursue an interest in religion. Quote, Eugene was not religious at all, recalls his best friend from that period, Walter Pomeroy. To compensate for his lack of religion, he zealously sought knowledge in science and mathematics, biology, algebra and trigonometry, etc. As Walter says, quote, he went to high school at a time when science was expected to save the world. Most of the people who were being prepared for college were planning to become scientists, physicists, engineers, or medical doctors. San Diego High was what would today be referred to as, quote, inner city school. The college prep students formed a relatively small percentage of the student body. These intellectual achievers were in the same club that took the same courses in the pre-college curriculum together. Rather. But within their ranks was a clear social division. The main group of them, by far the largest, was composed of students from wealthy families from the, quote, good part of town. The smaller group was composed of 6 or 7 boys from middle to lower middle class families, 3 of whom were Jewish and 1 of whom was Mexican. Eugene and Walter belonged to the latter group. Eugene, fourth from the right. Okay, so there's like pictures of him with his dog Ditto here. So, okay. So it says, right on. What's up, my brother? Death and Compromise, my guy. Okay, so it says, the members of the wealthy group were active in student government, seeking election at class offices, and made up membership of the school social club of the pre-fraternity sorority type. Although they were friendly to the other students, quote, after all, says Walter, quote, you were a vote. They generally kept their own company. They were the social elite of the campus. The small group was united by a common interest in music, literature, and art. During lunch breaks, the boys would discuss books they had read or the works of classical music they loved. They never listened to popular teeny bopper music or the era. Quote, we were hardly aware that such a thing existed, Walter recalls. It did not attend the high school, quote, sock hops. Although Eugene and some of the others had athletic ability and received A's in gym class, they did not try out for, sports teams, says Walter. Quote, we were what today would be called the nerds. From Walter, Eugene received the nickname of, oh, what is that? Okay, OIGN. I'm not even going to attempt to say it. A corruption of Eugene Onegin, the name of the famous narrative poem by Pushkin and the opera by uh, Tchaikovsky. I guess that's it. Tchaikovsky. I don't know. I'm not even going to attempt that one. Considering what he has become in later years, the connection with Russia is an interesting one. The students in Eugene's group were very well read and culturally advanced for their age. Walter felt privileged to be part of the group and learn from it, since he had been exposed to the relatively little culture prior to high school. The Jewish boys had been raised on classical music and had some strong opinions on the subject. They especially praised Mozart, Beethoven, and Brahms, but no use for the modern composers. Walter, on the other hand, preferred the moderns, and so would enter into debate with others on the relative works of, for example, uh, Brahms and Debussy or something. Where did Eugene stand in these discussions? He says, quote, he was more attracted to the distinctly classical than the modern composers. Walter says, quote, but he listened to everything, gave it all a chance. He was slow to pass judgment. Eugene's favorite piece of music at this time was the aria in the last act of Puccini's Tosca, in which the hero, about to be executed, writes a letter to his beloved, beginning with the words, quote, and the stars were shining. Eugene especially liked the recording of Aria's song by Fruccico Taglavini. Quote, we listened to it many times, Walter says, and uh, rhapsodize about how great we thought it was. When the group of friends would argue over intellectual matters, Eugene did not want to express his own opinion. Quote, mostly he would examine things, Walter says, and, quote, and if you made a blunder in your argument, he'd be quick to show it. The most quiet and introspective among us, he was more likely to be a commentator than an agitator. Okay, so there's some pictures of him here from 1951, and he's looking more like a beatnik in these photos, like very similar to like a Jack Kerouac or something. Um, okay, it says Yeah, that's it. You're right. Okay. So, Eugene studied intensely in high school. Quote, the burning night, midnight oil. As his mother said, once Esther told him, quote, at the rate you're studying, you'll be a very smart man someday. Quote, I don't want to be smart, he said. I want to be wise. Quote, with his native intelligence, Eugene could have received B's without doing anything. Walter attests, but he worked harder than anyone ever knew. He was so incredibly thorough in everything he put his hands to. He had an analytical way of looking at things. His slowness in passing judgment was especially helpful in chemistry, because he would carefully look at all parts of his experiments before forming a conclusion. In the words of Eugene's nephew, Mike Scott, who was only 7 years his junior, quote, Eugene was phenomenal academically. He was off the scale. Sometimes his work's marks were so high above those of the other students that he'd be given only an A. At the same time, however, he continued to exhibit the qualities of his father. His mother recalls hearing him saying, quote, don't let anyone think you're important. Sally Scott, Eugene's niece, remembers the following about him, quote, he was always Uncle Jeanie to me. He was quiet and very much the scholar. He was ever the teacher, ever patient. And even as a youth, he had a certain inner composure set him apart. As a boy, that difference may have caused him some grief until he found his true home. Quote, I remember one incident that involved books. At the family dinner on holidays, Eugene would join the group for dinner and retire to his room and studies immediately after. I have a love of books myself, and one day he found me in his room reading his books, perhaps 9 or 10, and a bit frightened as being caught. He asked me which books I liked best. There were two, A Dog Named Chips and Charlie by Albert Payson Terhune. He then presented a challenge. If I could memorize the titles and authors' full names by the next visit, the books would be mine to keep. I'd read them many times over the years and had read them to my daughter. I still have the books. In high school, Eugene demonstrated a remarkable felicity to languages. Learning Spanish, German, French, by the time he graduated, he was writing original poems in German. He excelled in mathematics, which Walter attributes to the fact that his discipline, in addition to acquiring an analytical mind, involves a great deal of introspection. Eugene's math teacher hoped he would pursue a career in their field and championed him a student worthy of receiving college scholarships. Eugene's English teacher, Mr. Baskerville, also took an interest in him and his future. According to Walter, Baskerville encouraged a free artistic lifestyle. He enjoyed music and had a great love for Spanish Romantic poetry. Among other things, he introduced Eugene to American nature poet Robinson Jeffers, a man who protested against society and its wars at a time when, unlike today, it was very unfashionable to do so. Mr. Baskerville found Eugene a summer job at a bookstore in San Francisco. While working there, Eugene stayed for 3 months at a Hotel de France, a boarding house where everyone spoke French and ate European cuisine. During high school years, Eugene and Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment, but as later he said, he did not fully understand or appreciate the depths of Dostoevsky or of the at that time. Quote, Eugene had no time for trivia, his mother said. The senseless diversions of the high school students, as well as the pomp of high school ceremonies, were a source of absolute boredom to him. Mike Scott remembers being amazed that Eugene had no desire to learn to drive, let alone own a car. At a time when great peer pressure was attached to one having, quote, wheels, Eugene felt that even his friend Walter was not serious enough and objected to his carousing and running around at night, quote, like a butterfly. When it came time for the high school graduation ceremony, exercises and celebrations with all proud parents and pageantry, Eugene did not want to be bothered with a standard renting of a tuxedo. Eugene did, however, take part in the production of a school play which was performed during the commencement. Although, with the 12 other students under the supervision of a teacher, he helped write the play, acted in it, and was in charge of selling the tickets. The play, entitled, quote, Grown a Little Taller, was written with the aim of pleasing the students and parents of relatives who comprised the audience. uh, okay. Expressing the American dream that was still prevalent in the 1950s, it upheld the ideals of family, religion within reason, economic and career advancement, responsibility, and hard work together with humanitarian service in the spirit of Albert uh, Schweitzer. 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 That's nice. Eugene graduated from San Diego High School in June of 1952. Academically, he was ranked at the top of his class. In high school yearbook, his fellow students wrote notes such as, quote, Eugene the genius. Lots of luck and don't give Einstein too much competition. He received a number of scholarships grants, the largest being $4,000 for George F. Baker Scholarship, which he had given thanks to the enthusiastic endorsement of his math teacher. When he received this reward, he did not make a big show of it. His mother, having found out about the award, elated, asking him, "Where's the letter?" Quote, "In the drawer," he replied calmly. Remembering this and similar instances, his mother said of him, quote, "I never saw such a modest boy." He even returned to the smaller scholarships he received, explaining this by saying, quote, "I've had enough." At this time, Eugene had no definite idea about a future career, no plans beyond a decision to enter Pomona College in Southern California. His math teacher was later disappointed when Eugene did not major in mathematics. Quote, "Eugene could have succeeded in anything," Walter said, "but he did not have anything to pour himself into. He needed something to be passionate about." San Diego was filled with canyons, parts of which were overgrown with trees, shrubs, and grasses. Near the Rose's modest suburban home was one such ravine, locally called the Juniper Canyon, through which Eugene took long walks alone. Sometimes he would go at night, fascinated by the starry realm above the trees. What he thought was, during these hours of solitude, is unknown. It is likely, however, that these long walks were bound up not only with thinking, but also some kind of suffering. Father Paul Florensky, the great Russian scientist and martyr, once said that, quote, "The fate of the greatest is suffering for the external world and the inward suffering that comes from oneself. So it was, and so it is, and so it shall be." Eugene was now experiencing that unnamed inward suffering, the result of becoming conscious of being different from those around him. Since his mind enabled him to understand things far beyond others, he was plagued with boredom with the common things he had already experienced and understood. He had an appetite for more. He wanted to go, but where to where? But to where? There was on him that strange stamp of nobility, which made him incapable of finding fulfillment in lower material things, the things of this earth. Quote, "Eugene had deep eyes," Walter recalls. "You didn't want to look into them, because they would burn into you. It was as if he was attempting to see into the heart of matters always. He always seemed to me like a tea kettle that was about to blow out steam. You knew something was bullying in there. You waited for him to blow his stack, but he never did. He was always calm, observing things, waiting to do something which was what he was soaking up." Eugene had become a thinker, a, quote, "lover of wisdom," who required an answer to the question, quote, "why?" And whatever the answer was, he was to experience and live it. This much he knew, or rather felt, even then, and it was then this which would determine the course of his life up until his very death. Okay, so we're at the chapter Seeds of Rebellion, and this is chapter 2 of the book. So what I'm going to do is what's up, man? How you doing? So I'm going to read the second chapter of the book, and then I'm probably going to end after this. And then we're going to return. I'm going to make this a series of just doing readings from here. So it says Seeds of Rebellion. "The errors of great men are more fruitful than the truths of little men." That's Friedrich Nietzsche. Okay, so in the autumn of 1952, Eugene entered Pomona College in Southern California. and moved into a dormitory room there. By this time, Eugene was 6'2", had grown into a tall, slim, well-formed man. He was fair complexion with a strong jawline, a perfect set of white teeth, a long and rather unusually sculptured nose, a high forehead, and thick brown hair when he combed back. The most prominent, intriguing aspect of his appearance was his large, thoroughly penetrating blue eyes. He usually wore a white dress shirt with the sleeves rolled up, together with Stanford. Panamona was considered the best California's private schools. It was also regarded as one of the top small liberal arts colleges in the country. Like Harvard, it had been founded by the Congregationalist Protestants of New England, known as the quote Oxford of the Orange Grove. It was modeled on the Oxford system of independent associated colleges. Many of Pomona's professors were from Ivy League colleges. Some were Rhodes Scholars. Since there was one professor to every 10 students, much individual attention could be given, but the competition was high. For every applicant, the college admitted it had torn down three others, which is Congregationalist background. Pomona was still a center of conservative values when Eugene went there. In these prosperous post war years, the atmosphere was quite complacent. Ivy covered buildings, rows of peppers and eucalyptus trees, and grassy commons were set beneath clear skies amidst a warm, languid Mediterranean culture. The nearby town was only a few thousand people, and at a small American college this time, tremendous importance was to be attached by students to popularity. Everyone knew who was, quote, popular and who wasn't. Those students who were picked by the college authorities as the most likely to succeed were called, quote, ghosts, symbols of dedication, and who served as backseat advisors to bumbling freshmen. As one student at the time observed, it was, quote, every girl's dream to marry a ghost. Most of the ghosts were, quote, nappies, members of Nu Alpha Phi, the most prestigious of the social fraternities. As in high school, it was also very fashionable to have, quote, wheels and cruise around. Among the social activities of the, quote, popular crowd were the dances, beach parties, ski parties, and especially the football games. Before each game, there would be pep rallies around a fire and in a football field, at which time the college song would be chanted. Drum beat, drum beat, drum beat. Drum beats rolled o'er the silence profound, far above Pahona, chanting graves, making echoes resound far above Pahona. Something. I don't know. This is just a chant. Other big events surrounded the initiation of freshmen, including a, quote, sizing up ceremony for women in a wild mudhole fight between freshmen and sophomores. To the 18-year-old Eugene, all these activities and all these hankerings after popularity and success were matters of total indifference. If this was indeed, quote, real life, he was growing more and more disgusted with it. Although he continued to exhibit the same reserve, dignity, and thorough personality of his younger days, passions were beginning to boil inside of him. Everything fell away before his first objective, to find out himself to find out for himself why he existed in the first place, to know, to understand reality in the highest sense. For answers to his quote ultimate questions, Eugene naturally used his greatest asset, his intellect. He began to make a serious study of Western philosophy, taking several courses in philosophy department. One of his instructors was Frederick Sontag, a tough, demanding professor who had become something of a legend around Pomona. At the end of his freshman year, Eugene wrote a paper outlining the philosophical conclusions which he relying on to his logical mind, his knowledge of science and mathematics, and a little help from the superbrain of Spinoza, who had come to his paper, quote, God and Man, their relationship. Eugene stated, quote, universe is in turn for God. It is an improvement over the latter term. I believe for it far more readily conveys the personal unified concept which I wish to present. All science points to the existence of the universe, the totality of things. Nothing in science points to the existence of a God. removed from the universe. From the present time, since I have not yet developed my own theory of knowledge, I assume for convenience sake I have gained knowledge. I can gain knowledge as certain as it can be obtained through science. Therefore, I believe in finding of science that point is the existence of the universe. I reject the concept of an independent God for insufficient evidence. This was all that Eugene's empirical reason could attain to. Even Spinoza's brain could not do much better. As for the purpose of life, Eugene wrote, quote, "Man's purpose in life is existing, and existing happily. Man should live for this happiness, accepting times when he is not happily merely as a passage to higher times. His love for the universe will tide him over to better times." So that's a really strict atheistic mindset there. There's no God. There's only reason. There's no really any absolute truth besides science. Um, and what's interesting about like people that say like the only thing to obtain is happiness, but what is that rooted in really? And I you know through my journey in orthodoxy, I think I've come to the conclusion that that's really rooted in man wanting to get back to paradise. That's why he's always searching for happiness, I think. But anyways, so uh, by this time, at such statements reveal, Eugene had completely rejected the Protestant Christianity of his formative years. Despite his love for his parents, he began to hate the complacent, prosaic, uh, consumer-orientated, middle-class culture he had been raised in. Its idea of God he felt was shallow and not worthy of one who aspires to the higher reaches of the intellect. Its religion was just an unquestionable acceptance of docile answers by people who are afraid to or actually unable to look deeper into the nature of things. To Eugene, Protestantism represented the status quo. People living for this world, enjoying earthly happiness while embellishing, justifying, and making more tolerable their everyday existence by resorting to, quote, the religious side of their life. Since he himself, um, I lost my place. Since he inwardly felt different from the status quo, he knew he could never squeeze himself within the parameters of the Protestant American, quote, happy family worldview. The thought of such an existence therefore became intolerable to him. He refused to accept the, quote, accepted answers. He wanted to escape, but for the lack of a place to escape to, he was left only to rebel. At the same time, his soul, whether he knew it or not, was seeking something more spiritual than Spinoza's dry intellectualism. Young idealists who are rebelling against the Christianity of their childhood, who cannot accept nothing above the rational and yet seeking something else to satisfy their spiritual needs, are apt to hear the call of a number of different siren voices. In his search through Western philosophy, Eugene was drawn to one most compelling of these, the wild prophetic voice of Friedrich Nietzsche. At the same point, while in college, he read Nietzsche's Thus Spake uh, Zoroastria, Zarathustra, or something. Zarathustra? That's it. In the original German, I was overwhelmed by it. Eugene had several things in common with Nietzsche. Both he and Nietzsche were seekers of noble ideals, involved in an intense, passionate, and inquiry into the ultimate questions. Both of them had been born into the religious atmosphere of Protestantism, which promised to give them everything their souls needed, yet could not. Both were introverted, felt isolated from their fellow man, underwent inward suffering which others could not comprehend, and both detested standardization, domestication, and, quote, the herd mentality, of which they regarded Protestant Christianity to be the example. Many years after leaving college, Eugene was to describe Nietzsche's rebellion against Christianity as follows, quote, he was a very romantic temperament, and he was very open to all kinds of higher ideas. In his youth, he was a Protestant seminary student and came to hate Christianity because he saw in it the principle of weakness. This, of course, was true because Luther had taken out of Christianity the idea of the ascetic struggle and left it something very weak, which does not satisfy either the mind or the heart. Nietzsche could see no one was struggling, no great ascetics, no heroes of Christianity, and from this he concluded that the whole of Christianity was a monstrous farce, a deception practiced upon humanity who does not satisfy the reason of the wants of truth, and which is full of superstition. Nietzsche was so full of ideas that one can know only what is rational, and therefore he rejected everything above the rationale. On the other hand, he saw that Christianity says nothing to the heart because it becomes so watered down, that it is feeble. He saw it as a simple way of keeping people quiet and satisfied with their lot, and he said that was for the herds. Quote, Nietzsche himself was filled with the highest natural instinct for the nobility and struggle. He was a great student of Greek literature. One of his books talks about the Dionysian element in Greece. Until this time, people regarded Greece as the home, the classic traditional of Apollo. But he said no, that Greece was also filled with striving, with a romantic feeling which he symbolized by Dionysius, and this is what he wanted, to be like Dionysius, constantly striving, struggling for something higher. Eugene had a desire to share in such struggles and striving, which, although he did not know it then, was actually a desire for the ascetic denied him. Asceticism denied him by Protestantism. Nietzsche's striving, together with his rejection of Christianity, led him to develop the idea of the quote Superman. Man, Nietzsche said, is small and weak. He is only temporary. He might be overcome by the Superman must supersede him. And later, Eugene was to make the comment that, quote, Nietzsche is the answer to Nietzsche is Saint Anthony the Great, who did overcome mankind in his own human nature and was like an angel on earth. At this time, however, Eugene had no real exposure to lofty aspects of Christian asceticism. Quote, Nietzsche, Eugene once said, quote, wrote some lovely poems about the dark side of life. Hold on one second. Okay, I'm back. All right. So we're at Nietzsche, and what did he say? Here, he says, oh yeah, he's talking about the Superman, and the answer to Nietzsche is Saint Great Anthony the Great, who did some overcome mankind like his own human nature and was like an angel on earth. So if I remember correctly, Saint Anthony the Great went into like a cave out in the desert, and he lived there for a really long time. And then eventually, there was people that came to him like Saint Paul of Thebes or something like that, and who was an early Christian monk, and I think they found him in the cave, and he looked like he reached the state of theosis, like a perfected state, like a higher state even than Adam and Eve were in. So I think that's what he's talking about there. Uh, at this time, however, Eugene had no real exposure to the lofty aspects of Christian asceticism. What Nietzsche said, once said, quote, wrote some lovely poems about the dark side of life, deep midnight loneliness, etc. Uh, Here he was speaking of such poems as the quote Night Song, in which uh, Zarathustra gives voice to his feelings. Quote, night has come. Now all fountains speak more loudly, and my soul is too a fountain. Something unappeased is within me. It longs to find expression. A craving for the love is within me. Alas, ice is all around me. My hands is burned by the icy night has come. Alas, I must be light, and thirst for the nocturnal and loneliness. During the unhappy period of this life, manhood, or his early manhood, Eugene must have identified with precisely such dark and terrible, excruciating longing for the soul. Insanity marked the last 12 years of Nietzsche's life, during which time he was unable to write anything. Although most writers assume that this madness came upon him from rather suddenly, more sensitive ones, such as Thomas Mann, recognize its gradual development through Nietzsche's literary career. Nietzsche's mad ideas were the logical outcome of the proud philosophy of the German idealists and even of Spinoza, which in denying attenuating of the reality of God led eventually to self-worship, absurdity, and nihilism. Nietzsche, the mad prophet, bellowed out like the pagan dragon of Wagner, poetic fire of the new religion of the Superman, the Antichrist. And however mad this religion might have been, it made more sense to the young Eugene than what he regarded as the spineless, effeminate Christianity of his age. Okay, so we're going to stop at chapter 2. The next chapter is going to be nonconformist, and I'll do another hour on that probably tomorrow, and we'll just continue on until we get through this book. I think that's what this beginning of a series of not of this world, and I might sprinkle other videos in between this. I don't know, but we'll see. I do have other series I want to continue on that I've done in the past that I have to get back to, like the struggle for humanism and a couple other things. But we'll see what happens. So I appreciate everybody stopping by. I'm Unseen Warfare, and I appreciate you, and I'm out. Later.